Broad question, who is God, and how we answer that particular question. There are a number of texts, and we have, I think last year sometime, I'm pretty sure toward the end of the year, we answered this question by looking at a certain text in Exodus. Tonight I want us to think about this question by looking at Isaiah chapter 6. There are certain benchmark statements, I guess is what I'll call them. They're very influential, they're very informative in helping us to understand who God is. And and some of the genesis of this was a podcast some friends and I have. A number of people sent in and asked us this question: how would we answer the question, who is God? And that led us all into this long discussion with each other, trying to, I guess, synthesize. How do you talk about God and just kind of sum him up in a short, well, at that time was an hour episode. But this is one of those texts, and so I want us to simply read it and then make observations about it. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood the seraphim. Each one had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the foundations of the thresholds shook at the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. And I said, Woe is me, for I am lost. For I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphim flew to me, having in his hand a burning coal that he had taken with tongs from the altar. And he touched my mouth and said, Behold, this has touched your lips, your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for. And I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Then I said, Here I am, send me. And he said, Go and say to this people, Keep on hearing, but do not understand. Keep on seeing, but do not perceive. Make the heart of this people dull, and make their ears heavy, and blind their eyes, lest they see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their hearts, and turn and be healed. Then I said, How long, O Lord? And he said, Until the cities lie waste without inhabitant, and houses without people, and the land is a desolate waste. And the Lord removes people far away, and the forsaken places are many in the midst of the land. And though a tenth remain in it, it will be burned again, like a terebinth or an oak, whose stump remains when it is felled. The holy seed is its stump. So, from this text, I want us to see 3 things. First of all, let's look at the context here. The context, when we look at the placement of this book, one of the things that we see is that it's a strange placement, because this is Isaiah's call to be a prophet. Now, what makes that strange is usually when somebody's called to be a prophet, that takes place at the beginning of the book. Right? Ezekiel sees this elaborate vision, and that's how God calls him. And many of the other prophets, Jeremiah being the same way, God appears to him, God communicates to him, and it's at the beginning of the book, and that launches his ministry. Isaiah, though, we've got 5 chapters of what looks like preaching, and then we're told about him seeing this vision, which looks like, if you compare it to like an Ezekiel or a Jeremiah, it looks like his call to be a prophet. So what do you make of it? Well, I think there are a couple of options in making sense of it. One of which has to do with the book itself. Some people have suggested that the first 5 chapters kind of serve as a synopsis of everything that he's going to say about really Israel's condition. And thus, he begins to move into details in chapter 6. So with this type of thinking, chapter 6 would really be the beginning of the book. And the first 5 chapters would be like reading the preface of a book. Okay? Other people think that he was himself a prophet from the very beginning, and that this is not necessarily his call as much as it is a wake-up call, because he had not been taking God as seriously as he ought. Either way, the placement of it is a little strange, but there are ways of interpreting it that make sense. Now, the other thing we need to see is Israel's apostasy. Apostasy Apo is a prefix that describes away, okay? And so apostasy means to fall away from God, to reject God. And so in this apostasy, in these first 5 chapters, well, we'll just look at chapter 1 and chapter 5 very briefly. Chapter 1, he describes their apostasy as complete. He says they're like animals, they don't understand anything. Then he says they have estranged themselves from me. They are rebellious and they are sick from the top of their head to the bottom of their feet, and they don't even know it. The land is going to be left desolate. What is coming for them is horrendous, and they don't even know it. And then he said, and you know what? Their worship, it makes me sick. These are the people who will spread out. Jews had a common custom, whether standing or kneeling, they would hold their hands open toward God. And God says what is so disgusting is they hold their hands open to me, meanwhile their hands are covered in the blood of other people because of the way they treat them and mistreat them. And they expect me to accept what they bring in worship while mistreating all the creatures who bear my image. He says, it's not going to happen. But then when you come to chapter 5, there are a series of 6 woes. And woe, a prophetic woe, is the idea of God calling attention to something that's going to bring punishment on them. And so when you look at these 6 particular woes, the first woe is upon the people who make land grabs, and they manipulate people, and they mistreat, and they bribe, and do all the different types of things to make sure that they own all the property and that they take it from all people. Now you have to remember, this is not 21st century capitalism. This is the laws clearly stated. God told them the land is not yours. It is mine. They had every 7 years, and then every year of Jubilee on the 50th year, that year of release when lands that had been taken or had to be sold because of some kind of an issue would then be turned back over to their original owner. God said, you're putting profits over people. It won't work. Then he says you're basically just a bunch of partiers. You like to go out, you get slobbering drunk, you listen to you take in all of the music and all of the parties and all of the debauchery that goes along with it. And he said, I'm not having it. Then he says that you have embraced sin. You are draw iniquity with the cords of falsehood. You just keep pulling it in and finding new ways to sin. Your ability to see things is completely upside down. Your judgment is so corrupted, it is upside down. You call good evil and evil good. You put light for darkness and darkness for light. Your moral compass is literally upside down. And he says, and furthermore, you're conceited. You're wise in your own eyes. And because of that, punishment will come. Now, in the backdrop of that, and what Israel has been doing, God appears to his prophet. Whether to call him to be a prophet or to get his attention, he tells us something about his character. And so as we think about the character of God, the first thing we see is that he is transcendent. Transcendent is the idea that you can't completely wrap your arms around something. It's steady, it's sturdy, it continues over time. And one of the reasons we see this is it says in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne. Now Uzziah was a very long reigning king, okay, brought stability to the nation. But in the year that he died, and look, especially in the times of monarchies, if you had a good king, you dreaded the day when he died. because you didn't know what you were getting in replacement. And so you can see the people fretting over the fact that he is dead. And it's as if God appears and said, yes, he's dead. And he is dead, and he died a leper because he went into the temple and tried to offer incense, which I told him he could not do. And now he's dead, and I'm still alive. And you need to understand who I am. And take me more seriously than you take people. Number two, his authority it's inherent and it is unquestionable. When he's presented to us in this, he's seated on a throne, a symbol of authority, high and lifted up, untouchable. The train of his robe, the longer it was, the bigger it was, indicated the royalty. It fills the entire temple. He's got heavenly messengers that have 6 wings that are around his throne at all times. And when he talks, the literal temple shakes. You know, when Isaiah is watching this, do you think for a second he wonders who's in control? No. He doesn't wonder one bit. And one of the things we should see is that God is in control. And his authority is unquestioned, and it is unrivaled. But further, when these angelic escorts speak about God, they praise his holiness. We've talked about it before, holy, 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 the idea of the superlative degree, like good, better, and best. And when it comes to the holiness of God, and you study the characteristics and the attributes of God, holiness is one of those things that's almost, Bible students throughout the centuries have pretty much come to the conclusion that it's almost the same. When you say holy, it's almost the same thing as saying godlike. It is different. It is other. You see, one of the things that sometimes we forget as people is we forget the otherness of things, and we cannot differentiate between the common and the special. For an example, I won't say who it was, but there was a president of the United States in years past the president who preceded him had conducted himself in ways in the Oval Office that he thought were not respectful. He would prop his feet up on the desk, the resolute desk which usually sits in the Oval Office, and talk on the phone. And he would wear his jogging suit into the Oval Office, and the president who followed him said, "That won't happen." As a matter of fact, the story is told that one night he left something in the Oval Office that he needed. Had already been in his pajamas. He put his suit back on and his tie back on. And he walked back into the office because it was the people's office. And it deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. People say, that's ridiculous. It may be, but it shows you a belief that some things are special and should be treated with respect. And when it comes to God, many times that's what we forget. That He is, in His holiness, very different. And it has to do also, there is a certain moral aspect to it, that morally speaking, He does no wrong. That He is perfect in every single way. But then the other thing that they speak of is His glory, how it fills the whole earth. Glory in Scripture has to do with the idea of light and radiance, and how it just kind of shines forth. And so some of the idea would be, so when the kings would put on their armor and the sun would hit it, and you're looking at them in full armor and the sun hits their armor, you can see the light would be blinding, and thus it represented their glory. And so when he's talking about God's glory, he's saying the whole earth is full of that glory. It's unequaled honor and status. That's who God is. Now, when it comes to seeing God that way, it should evoke certain emotions and thoughts and feelings within us. I got to be honest with you, when you look at Exodus 32 and 33 and 34, and you look at a text like Isaiah chapter 6, and you see him through the words that are used, you see him and who he is, part of you wants to get up and run. You just want to get up and run. Or you want to be like, hey, Moses, scoot over and let me inside that rock, because I'm in a place I don't belong. Or we can respond the same way Isaiah does. What does Isaiah say? When he sees God and his holiness, what are the first words out of his mouth? Woe is me. I'm lost. One of when we come to see God for who he is, one of the first things we will immediately recognize is who we are ourselves. And that is that we are sinful people. And there's no comparison between me and him. And part of that makes me, when I think about being in the presence of God, part of that makes me afraid. Because I know who I am. I know what goes on in my head. I know what I've done. And when you look at him and you look at yourself, it's like the old Sesame Street song, one of these three is not like the other. And it's me. But what's amazing is when God in his holiness and his character, when it interacts with us, it does what you would think to be completely opposite. So when his holiness interacts with us, he actually forgives us. Isaiah said, I'm lost. So what does God do? He takes one of the seraphim and he tells them to go get a coal and to put it on Isaiah's lips and to tell him his sin has been forgiven. You see, in my humanity, my natural reaction to seeing who God is to be deathly afraid of him. His reaction to me is, I'll take care of it. I'll take care of it. I will forgive you. I came across this statement this week that I love, talking about God's holiness. Michael Bird said this. He said, God's holiness is not a state of incandescent purity that must be protected from fallen creatures. Instead, it is a consuming and a contagious power that fixes all that is broken, heals what is marred, pacifies what is hostile, and rescues what is lost. One writer concludes, thus the holiness of God both opposes the profane world and embraces it, bringing it into fellowship with a holy God. Because God's holiness does blaze against sinfulness. But it also welcomes the sinner. And so the thing that, if I'm being totally honest, the thing about God that scares me the most is his holiness, his difference. But in that difference, he does not view me as something to be thrown away. For some reason, he looks at me and he says, you're worth repairing. you're worth forgiving. That's not who I expect. And one of the things, and part of what this, we'll look at some more texts throughout the coming months with this question, is part of what makes this so peculiar in my mind is, and look, I mean, I'm 38. It's been 20 years since I was at home. At this point in my life, I don't know if I was taught a certain way about God or if I simply just took it based upon what I was taught and then morphed it into a belief about God. I can't tell the difference anymore, okay? So I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just saying my view of God was so wrong. And it wasn't until you started opening up texts like Exodus 32 and 33 and 34 and Isaiah 6, and you start listening to what they're saying. And the God that says, gotcha, I'm about to crush you. That's not who you find. It's who you expect, but it's not who you get. So he's forgiving. What's more than that? He's enlisting. Not only does he forgive me, he enlists me. He allows me to serve him. In verse 8, this inter-Trinitarian conversation, whom shall I send and who will go for us? And Isaiah volunteers himself to serve God. He allows that same imperfect, sinful creature to serve him. This is what the apostles would talk about, or Paul especially would talk about in 2 Corinthians, when he's talking about his ministry, and he says, look, we have this treasure in clay pots. Now look, what valuables we do have, we don't put them in brittle little pots that already have cracks in them. We put them in things that are fitting for them. God is saying, I'm going to put my treasure in broken pots. I'm going to put my treasure in people. So that when people see the treasure, they will know it's not the broken pot. It's the treasure. These are ordinary people. There's nothing impressive about them. But that treasure that they carry, it's life-changing. And so he allows us to engage in that. And then beyond that, his patience. Look, I don't know what's... If I'm being 100% honest, I don't fully know what's going on with me this week, but my patience has been pushed to its end. It has just been pushed to its end. And as frustrated as you can feel with it constantly being pushed, and you come back and you look at God, and here is God dealing with sinful people, and what does he say? Well, forget him. No. He said, Isaiah, I want you to go and warn them. How long? Until nobody's left. And you know what, Isaiah? They're not going to listen to you. They're not going to listen to a word you say. Sold the same thing to Ezekiel. I'm sending you to people, they're hard-headed, their head is as hard as a flintstone. They're not going to listen to a word you have to say. Oh, they will think, Ezekiel, that you're a good preacher, you're a good public speaker. They'll talk to their friends about what a good orator you are. But the heart of who you are, the message of what you're preaching from me, they don't want anything to do with it. You see, those are the moments where we have to be reminded when our patience is pushed to the end, that as far as our patience can go, God's patience is way beyond us. And so we learn something about how much God values people and how many opportunities He gives to people when you and I believe, I believe fully, sometimes justifiably, would say, no, I'm done. I'm done. That's who God is. But that's not who you expect. So I want to close just by looking at 3 quick things, what this means for us. When I understand this about the character of God, the first thing is God is always going to challenge me in my sinfulness. The most unloving thing we can do for one another is to not challenge the wrongs that we commit. Look, it's not my job to run around and try and police the world. That's not anybody's job. God's got that one under control. It's not our job to make anybody do anything. You want a recipe to drive yourself crazy? Try and make people do something. Never happen. Well, if I bring it up, they're not going to listen to me. May very well be true. But sometimes we need to speak the truth into people's minds so that it at least gets on their radar. You may not accept it, you may not believe it, but I love you too much to let you continue in the path that you are taking without at least causing you to stop and think for a second. And God will always confront us because it's one of the most loving things He can do for us, is to show us who we are and where we need to change. Number 2, it tells me that He is somebody I can stake my life on. When you see who He is in these opening verses and He's on His throne, His authority is transcendent, it's unquestioned, it's absolute. Nothing can challenge it. You know, when I was a kid, we played had a lot of cousins, a lot of boy cousins, especially were close to my age. We played a lot of pickup games. Every sport, football, baseball, basketball, you name it. You know, there was one thing you knew in every sport. You put these 2 cousins together, just go ahead and write loss next to this game for you, because you ain't winning. You are not winning. And it was real. In all the years of us growing up, when some of these matchups hit, the other cousins never won. They might get close, but they never won. And so when you're trying to compose your team, you're trying to pick your team, you know that if you can find a way to stake this game on these 2 people, you're going to win. Well, that's what you do. Look, we have a choice of who we're going to stake our life on. Either we're going to stake it on God, or we're going to stake it on other stuff. You're going to hitch your wagon. You're going to, however you want to say it, we're all going to do that. We're going to hitch our wagon to somebody. We're going to, side with this person or this group of people or this, whatever you want to call it. Everybody's going to do it. The only problem is none of them stand a chance against God. It's like the it's like the commercial. That was an easy decision to swap insurance companies, wasn't it? It's easier than this. Hey, I need a pinch hitter. And you got a 5-year-old kid and Derek Jeter. Pretty simple, I think. No, I'm going to do what I want to do. Well, then pick a 5-year-old to pinch hit for you. You don't stand a chance. You pick God, you can't lose. We're going to stake our life on somebody, and He is someone that has the ability for us to stake our lives upon. And finally, in all the holiness that embodies Him, He desires to share it with us. I've got some pretty successful and remarkable friends. And that's not a bragging thing. I didn't say I was, I said they were. I've got other friends who are very, very good at what they do in ministry. And when I'm around them and I see them operate, or I talk to them and I see the way that they handle and do things, and just with a natural ease and giftedness, you look at it and go, man, I wish I could do that. I wish I could do that. Not even as well as he does it. I'd just like to be able to do like 50%. I just want to share in that. When you look at God and you see how different He is, not only does He forgive us, He desires us to share in His holiness. That's why He says to us in 1 Peter 1, I want you to be holy as I am holy. Or Hebrews chapter 12, I'm using my discipline because I want you to share in my holiness. Those are His words. I want you to share in my holiness. So who is God? Well, He's the Holy One. And while initially that's a scary thought. I had a professor who people would often say, I'm not really worried about America. God's going to take care of it. And he would always respond, that's exactly what I'm worried about. Oh, we're good. God's going to take care of us. He said, that's exactly what I'm worried about. Because sometimes God taking care of us is God punishing us. I think about that phrase when I think about dealing with this and this holiness. God is holy. Yeah. That's what I'm worried about. Because that's not who I am. Not in the way that He is. But when we come to this text, what we learn about Him is that He desires to make us like Him. And that we can be like Him. And that's a deal that's too good to be true in so many ways. So, wherever we are tonight, we serve a holy God. He is high and separate and different. But He has in Jesus condescended to our estate, shared in it, lived it, so that He can clean us up. So tonight, if we would share in His holiness, we come to Him with a penitent faith, acknowledging, seeing who He is, which will force us to see who we are, confessing Jesus to be the Son of God, and then to be baptized in water for the forgiveness of our sins, to have our slates wiped clean. Or maybe as New Testament Christians, we haven't been living the way that we should in the sharers and partakers of His holiness. Or maybe we're just struggling with something else. That same God desires to help us. And if we can help you tonight, we want to. So we stand and sing this song.